CEO of Agility Africa says the continent, this long view as the riskiest place to do business, might not look as risky in relation to other regions in a post-pandemic environment. Geoffrey White joins us for a conversation on Africa's huge potential despite the pandemic, more so the opportunities in the region post-pandemic. Thank you, Geoffrey, for taking the time out to join us. Let's take a deep dive. Now, obviously, Africa has had it better when it comes to the number of infections and fatalities from the COVID-19, as we all still watch, sadly, how things are still unfolding in key economies like particularly the US and Europe. But you say that in a post-COVID-19 world, Africa will probably not be as risky as it was, or the perception of it, perhaps. But I'm just wondering, what are those key positive macro trends that you see developing across the continent in a post-COVID-19 world?
So thanks. I think you're right. From a first point of view, COVID has been significantly less impacted on the continent than many predicted. I mean, there was predictions in the beginning of the year up to 10 million deaths. The reality is the World Health Organization are saying it's around about 40,000. So it's a fraction of what we were concerned about across the continent. But I think from a future perspective, COVID therefore has had less impact from a medical and casualty perspective, but it's had a big impact from a debt perspective. So there's an issue that how does Africa deal with the additional debt that it's got in relation to the very sensible policies that most countries have operated in relation to COVID. But I think looking forward, us as a global investor, we're very keen on increasing our investment and our footprint across the continent. We're building, as many of you are aware, we're building large international standard warehouse parks. And I think what our view on that is that we'll build a pan-African network of those, because we're very encouraged by the Continental Free Trade Zone and what that can create as a 1.3 billion person, largest free trade zone in the world for Africa. So we think that's a huge future economic driver. And we think the impacts of COVID from a global perspective is changing risk analysis. So if you look at some of the developed world that have had very bad phases, the risk there has gone higher. The risk in Africa, which was always perceived higher than it really is on the ground, but the risk difference between the developing and investing in the developed world and investing in the emerging markets world has actually got closer. So hence we believe there'll be a big boost of people wanting to invest into emerging markets. We're one of those, and we think that there's several macro trends that we had seen across Africa that we were investing with our warehouse parks to support. And we think those trends are actually getting expedited and being happening faster as a result of the pandemic. So things like local manufacturing, e-commerce, growth in e-commerce and e-commerce fulfillment. As I said, the Continental Free Trade Zone. We think the momentum that Africa is going to have around these macro trends, combined with the demographics in Africa, the youngest population, the ability for Africa to become a manufacturing center for the world, is actually putting Africa in a very strong position in the medium term.
Geoffrey, if I could just come in here now, while all of those no doubt positives, but still speaking about risk, we have seen debt levels rise in key economies on the continent, such as Nigeria and South Africa, and that is going to hamper the ability of governments to make much needed investment in key infrastructure. As you know, Africa still has a wide infrastructure deficit, also in social infrastructure. So these are the factors that are going to make the overall environment more conducive. These are the factors that make the environment attractive also to investors. I'm just wondering, from a risk perspective, shouldn't that be a big concern for would-be investors?
So the reality is, I think you'll see more private sector initiatives. I think governments will be in a weaker position to give bank guarantees and to support investment. So what you'll see is, like our program is a total private sector initiative. Each of our warehouse parks is an investment of about $150 million. We want to do them in all the major cities across the continent. And we do that as a private sector initiative. but it aligns with African growth. It creates jobs. It creates a platform that enables companies to come in and do business in Africa faster and easier and for less capex, because we've already built that little niche bit of infrastructure, which is the warehouse that can be used for assembly, manufacturing, storage and distribution. So I think you're going to see an increase in private sector initiatives across the continent that don't rely on financial support from the government to actually access what is going to be by 2025 a 2.5 billion person market with the largest youth proportion of anywhere in the world.
Now, for the manufacturing, you did mention manufacturing. For Africa to take manufacturing to the next level, obviously, we need to begin to include factors from the fourth industrial, adopt elements of the fourth industrial revolution. I'm talking about AI, robotics, machine learning, and additive manufacturing. How would you score, or what is your assessment of the continent in terms of how we are already beginning to adopt these elements to make our manufacturing base more competitive on a global scale?
So I think that ties in with manufacturing. To be successful needs volume. So obviously, I mean, you're in Lagos, you've got over 200 million people market. But the reality is, as the borders open up for regional trade in Africa with the Continental Free Trade Agreement, you can start accessing a $1.3 billion market. That enables you as a manufacturer to scale. Scale brings reduced cost of production, and reduced cost of production then puts you in a position as an African manufacturer where you can start supplying and being competitive in world markets, not just in Africa markets. So I think this whole momentum for using technology, enabling manufacturing locally, e-commerce and the growth in e-commerce. And bear in mind, e-commerce fulfillment requires 4 times the amount of warehousing in the end market than the traditional build 50 million units in China and ship them to the market. So again, the opportunities for investment in these areas and Africa's growth in them is huge. And it boils down to, as well, I think, the fact that Africa's demographic is so young. So you've got 85% of the population is under 25. So the reality is that they haven't got preconceptions about landlines and traditional shopping methods. You just look at the success of M-Pesa and in East Africa, of how e-commerce is beginning to get traction. And we think the whole digital transformation of people shopping on their phones, banking on their phones, getting data on their phones is going to be adopted by Africa far, far quicker than it is in other parts of the world.
Just one final question for the energy sector here in Africa. Of course, there have been new discoveries in oil and gas, but I'm just wondering, we're seeing a world where we're pushing away from fossil fuels into renewables. How much more time do you think Africa has, to take advantage of new investments in that space?
So I think there is a window of opportunity. You see, I mean, Mozambique has the potential to become one of the largest LNG producers globally. LNG is much cleaner than traditional oil. So there's a window during the transition away from fossil fuels for LNG to be the metrics of that transition. And I suspect that's going to be a 20, 30-year window to be completed. So you've got huge gas finds off Mozambique. You've got massive finds off Tanzania, although they're further down the development process. They're behind the process in Mozambique from a development perspective. You've got Total in Mozambique currently investing billions of dollars in their LNG facility construction. And likewise, you've got BP with very significant finds off Senegal and Mauritania. So I think the energy map across the continent is going to change significantly. And that's good for driving prosperity, creating jobs, creating huge amounts of foreign direct investment. And one of the benefits of the oil and gas industry is they're used to going to emerging markets and remote locations. So they're less risk averse than maybe other investors. So they'll go ahead with projects irrespective of the environment they're going into.